Hey everyone, SunTide here. So I just finished optimizing the Longsword for the new title update in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, and I wanted to quickly talk about all of the cool things they added to the game and how they change set building and stuff like that. The biggest one, I think, is the Qurio armor crafting, which is a topic all on its own. So I'm not going to talk about this in this video. I'm going to save this for another video in about a day or two because it's complicated. There are a few ways that I think are really good to handle it with regards to set building, but for this video, I'm going to talk about sets that don't use Qurio crafting, and then in the next video, we're going to talk about how you can adapt the sets we make for it. Qurio armor crafting, at least that is. For Qurio weapon crafting, it's actually relatively straightforward. Basically, you can upgrade your weapons to add some stats depending on some of your slots. So if I take this Thunder, for example, you can add different slots to it, assuming I actually enable the augmenting. I tested that quickly and then didn't save, which I'll probably do again. But yeah, so you can add different stats and things to the Longsword. So if you use 2 of the 5 slots you have, you can add up to 5 attack, which you can see, so 340, 345. If I try and use 4 of the slots, I get 10 attack. Affinity as well, it takes 3 slots to give 5% affinity, which is actually pretty good. You can also get a sharpness boost, which increases the amount of hits you can have at your max sharpness by 10, which is less good. You can increase your rampage slots, so Sunderer already has 2 slots, you can get a 3rd slot. And also if you are using an elemental weapon, you can add an extra slot, you can add extra element to your weapon. Surprisingly, the rampage slot upgrade isn't very good, just because the other ones are actually just good. 5 or 10 attack is rather significant, and the affinity is also really nice if you don't hit really high affinity. Sharpness isn't that good, but the element is good for elemental longsword just to fill out extra slots. In comparison, the rampage slot doesn't really do much. The main 2 use cases would be turning a high element weapon, giving an extra slot to let it access the element exploit rampage skill. But the trade-offs of the attack you lose from not getting the attack boost, as well as the trade-offs from not getting the 5% from the monster exploit ramp up skill, isn't really worth it. The other case you could use it for is if you want to turn a weapon with 1 slot and get 2 slots to equip the monster exploit rampage skill. But none of the longswords that only have 1 slot are that good, at least with regards to element. I think some of the raw weapons might beat the Sunderer, but the status weapons might be the Sunderer, but I didn't look into that with that much detail yet. So in general, what ends up being optimal is to maximize the raw. So get the plus 10 raw. Sometimes it's better to add affinity, sometimes better to add element. Either way, you can add element for the extra missing slots. But yeah, rule of thumb, raw is the best thing to add. But yeah, so the other cool thing they added is some new skills. I have not unlocked any of the monsters yet in this game. I only beat the Seething Maze rookies, but the main interesting ones we want for damage consideration is the element exploit skill. So you get this from the Silver Rathalos sets, which increases your elemental damage if a monster has at least 20 weakness to an element. This is different to the ramp up skill, because the ramp up skill that increases elemental damage works if an enemy has 25 or higher weakness. So this is a much lower threshold, it makes it a bit more usable. And because this Rathalos gear is very good, this is actually very nice to have. It's a nice bonus, and it comes up in a lot of elemental sets. The other 2 interesting damage skills are interesting, but not too practical. So they both come from the Lucent Nargacuga gear. So Sneak Attack boosts your damage if you attack from behind an enemy, which is hard in single player. and even in multiplayer, the weak point is usually going to be on the head, so you are going to spend a time on the back. And also, optimal longsword play relies on a lot of counters, and if you're countering, you're probably not going to be behind the enemy. So I didn't take that into account. Similarly, Adrenaline Rush boosts your damage if you dodge with a roll. Longsword doesn't roll very much. Longsword likes to counter with EI Spirit Slash and the Foresight Slash and whatever else. So because that doesn't activate Adrenaline Rush, Adrenaline Rush isn't going to be very useful. If you could dodge an attack, you could probably EI Spirit Slash the attack and 2 more damage than you would with a dodge roll. So all up, yeah, the one we care about the most is Elemental Exploit. But because Elemental Exploit is so good, 10% damage for 10% element for 1 slot. This massively increases the overall power of element in the new builds. To the extent that I believe against certain monsters like the Daimyo Hermitory, you get like 40% more damage. 40% more damage if you're using an elemental longsword versus using the raw longsword. So yeah, also got some cool new decorations. So the main interesting ones that we care about are the Protective Polish and the Quick Sheath, as well as Moss's Touch. I don't think I've unlocked them yet in my game. Basically, they take 4 slots and they increase the skill point by 2. So the Quick Sheath one becomes interesting because what it means is if you have an attack boost 2 with a 2 slot, that becomes equivalent to the QS, the typical Quick Sheath 2 with 2 slot decos that I typically talk about. So now you can use, basically it opens up the options, and if you have an attack boost 3 decoration, for example, which I do, that becomes significantly better. For the builds, I assumed you had either a Quick Sheath, I still mainly assume you have a Quick Sheath 2/2 decoration. I ran the same calcs for the attack boost 2/2 or the critical eye 2/2. The Quick Sheath 2/2 is still always going to be optimal. Or equivalent. So that's my nice baseline. Also, Grinder S is now added as a 3-slot decoration, which can make the Grinder builds better, but the Elemental builds got also better. So it's nice, but it's not optimal. But yeah, so in general, for the regards to the new armor, the Silver Rathalos pieces are very, very good. Not just because of critical element, the legs are very, very good. So in general, for raw builds, the Lobsy build, which I talked about in the last video, which is Lunagaron, Archfiend, Barrier, Sinister, and Ingot. The Ingot grease are replaced by the new Silver Rathalos grease. Also, the gold Rathian arms are pretty strong as well. Not always optimal, but they are pretty good. They just have lots of really, really, really good skills. But anyway, with that, we can talk about the builds now, finally. So yeah, the main, so the raw one is basically exactly the same as we saw last time. It just gets new ramp-up skills. It changes, as I said, from the Ingot Greaves to the Silver Soul Greaves, which lets you get a few extra skills and increase the damage from, I believe it was 740 to 766. So that is about 2% more damage, which is nice. Moving on from that, though, we got the fire builds. So what's a bit nice about the new builds is that they're a bit more simpler. We in general have 3 builds for every element, 1 for high element, 1 for middle element, and 1 for low element. This is a high elemental fire longsword, so it's still the Volcanic Apocalypse. So what's really cool is that the Silver Soul Mail gives 3 fire attack natively, which opens up a lot of 1 slots and lets you use different equipment. The Golden Loon Braces is there, which gives a lot of really, really cool skills. I believe it was critical boost, peak performance, has a 4 slot as well, a 2 slot, and the last skill is chain crit, which is the great 1 slot wonder. So yeah, we also get a free point of redirection, which is interesting. But yeah, so as you can see again, the Qurio crafting is mostly with regards to raw. Sorry, so what I draw here is that the the letters correspond to the slots. So 4 R's and an E mean you're using 4 slots for raw and 1 slot for element. But yeah, so this is your general fire, your high element longsword. Your middling element longsword is this. So you change the Volcanic Apocalypse for the Wyvern Blade Pale, then use the Rathalos longsword, which is very, very good, mostly because it has really, really high affinity, which means you don't need to put in much crit eye at all. So yeah, it ends up just being really quite strong. Not really much else to say here. We get a lot of fire attack from the Silver Soul Mail, again, for free, which is nice. As for the low elemental fire, we no longer, we're prioritizing raw here, so we don't really use the Silver Soul Mails anymore. We're going to use the Sinister Grudgecarp to get another point of Mail of Hellfire to drop our defense further. But in exchange for that, we get quite a bit more raw, and this is really good against enemies that have low fire weaknesses. I'll show you later on which enemies are weak to which. As for the next element, which is going to be water, the only good water longsword right now is still the Abyss Bringer Blade. So the Abyss Bringer Blade, even if you want to maximize element, you still want to use the raw Rampage upgrade. But yeah, so this one really benefits from the new elemental exploit on the Silver Soul Mail. That basically boosts your elemental damage by 10% again. And yeah, this is mostly similar, just with the addition of the silver pieces to add more elemental damage. The middling water build, again, uses the Abyss Bringer Blade. And basically, the main difference, what is the main difference between these two? Oh, sorry. It just turns the element exploit ramp up to the species exploit ramp up to let it hit enemies that don't have the elemental exploit, that don't hit the 25% hit zone value threshold for elemental exploit. And the weakest one, the weakest element but highest raw, is still the Abyss Bringer Blade. But this one prioritizes more raw by changing up some of the equipment, so we don't use the elemental exploit chest piece. We now use other stuff, just maximize the attack instead. So yeah, the build is on screen. Moving on from water, we can see the thunder builds. So thunder builds. So again, this was interesting because I thought the optimal thunder build would be to use the slot Qurio crafting upgrade to add elemental exploit, but the trade-off isn't worth it. The plus attack Qurio upgrade is still optimal. It's still optimal, like with other ones, and we're still going to use the species exploit ramp-up skills. But yeah, we do still get the benefit of the elemental exploit on the chest piece there, on the Silver Soul Mail. What's interesting is that all the pieces that use the Silver Soul Mail get a random fire attack 3. But yeah, this is the high element thunder build. Moving on to the middle element thunder build. You don't really want to use Silver Soul Mail anymore. So instead we get Mail of Hellfire to get a lot more raw that way, which is quite nice. Note that the attack boost is relatively low. If you want to increase our attack, we have the low element thunder build, which gets attack boost 7 by changing up some of the pieces and the decorations. And yeah, so thunder pieces are, it also uses the Shockstrike. I probably should have said that first. So it actually changes up the weapon as well. And yeah, it has a significantly higher raw than the previous set. The next element is going to be the ice. So the high element ice longsword is the Flicker Blizzard Slash. So this one can use elemental exploit natively. Again, we're using Qurio crafting to get high raw, and using the Silver Soul Mail to increase our elemental damage. And yeah, so this is, I guess, similar to a lot of the other elemental longswords I show. Moving on to the middling one. So you can see we no longer use the silver soul mail, getting instead the Mail of Hellfire and chain crit from the chest. And yeah, this one is the a lot of these sets end up becoming quite similar to one another, at least in terms of like the build identity. So the high ones have a lot of usually use the silver soul mail. The middle ones start to use Mail of Hellfire, and the lower ones just use the labs set, as you can see now, which has a lot of high attack boost. But this one, so the low element high raw ice longsword is the Moonbrand Lua Cheia. I probably slaughtered that pronunciation. I believe it is Portuguese for full moon, and Portuguese pronunciation is very different to anything I know. But yeah, so that is the ice longswords, and the last element is of course the dragon. So the high element dragon longsword is the red flash. And yeah, so again, silver soul mail on the chest to get elemental exploit. Again, the ramp up is not the elemental exploit ramp up, it is species exploit. The extra slot is not worth it. This is actually another interesting situation because there is a dragon longsword, the Fissure Force, which seem to have the good stats, but only one ramp up slot. Even if you give it the extra ramp-up slot to give it species exploit, it's still outclassed by the other longswords. But anyway, yeah, so this is the high elemental dragon longsword. Moving on to the middle elemental dragon longsword. So this becomes the Screakscythe, optimized for more element. So again, no more silver soul mail, but we get Mail of Hellfire. And finally, we have the low elemental dragon longsword, which uses the generic Laps set. But yeah, so this is all of our new sets, which I think is really, really cool and really interesting. So yeah, the set I always forget, that is the special counter anti-Rakna set. Again, so there are some enemies that are not vulnerable to species exploit, and the only one that can be counter-built to, because it's not weaker to other stuff already, is Kadachi. So there are two particular ice longswords that work to counter it, because of course there are, if you really, really don't like this guy. But yeah, so with that said, the main summary is element is strong, even stronger now that we have a silver soul mail. So for the high elemental ones, silver soul mail gives elemental exploit, which is really, really good. And even for the lower ones, the silver soul greaves just opens up more slots, which lets us do more stuff, and disproportionately improves the elemental longswords. Even the ramp still is improved in a way, because as you can see, a lot of them just get free element from the Qurio crafting, even after they optimize for a raw. The raw longswords just get few options. You cannot upgrade the element, which means you're just stuck increasing raw and affinity. You just have, or otherwise the slot's going to be wasted. So yeah, in the next video, hopefully within the next day or two, I'm going to have a really weird video where I'm going to talk about Qurio crafting with regards to armor, and a few interesting, like actually scientific physicsy ways of figuring out which ones, which skills you actually want to get from Qurio crafting. I'm actually excited for that one. I basically know exactly what I'm going to say already, but I thought I would make this video first. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Like and subscribe, especially if you're interested in further longsword builds and other cool stuff. And otherwise, I will see you all next time. Bye.